Okay, so let's get started. Basically, as you guys know, this is just an open dialogue looking for solutions, really just trying to come up, brainstorm with ideas and really look at like anybody's experience and also trying to figure out barriers. And then after that, we'll kind of lean in towards more of the solution orientation of the big question, which is how can we keep families' relationships healthy during prolonged pediatric cancer hospital stays? So this has been an actual discussion that happened, I was told at the last regional icon, in which a family was really open and honest about their struggles with the relationships with the siblings, right? The parent to other sibling relationship, and then also obviously partner to partner in the couple relationship as parents. And so I just wanted to kind of open it up and see, does anyone have any direct experience or observation of this actual situation where they're trying to connect or keep up the relationship in a healthy way with either another child in the family or their partner? Oh, great. Awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my experience, my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 19, and she was actually in college. So my husband and I basically had to relocate up to Northern California, Stanford area to be with her. And because of the nature of the state of her cancer and everything, we actually shared a room with her 24/7, which I'm sure she did not like. And it's, you know, if anybody slept on a green couch next to the hospital bed for more than 30 minutes, they know the pain of being there night and day. And I think for my husband and I, it really was, you know, putting any emotions or feelings you had for each other kind of on hold. It was all focused on, you know, patient focus, which, you know, is important, obviously, because it's a life or death situation, of course. But you get to that point where that's your new normal, right? And so it becomes a lot harder to focus or communicate about your emotions. It's more about what are we doing today to help the other person. And so that was one part of the experience. I think the other thing is just the isolation. You feel like you're on an island. And the only people that come to your island are the doctors or the visitors that potentially are going to come see you, but everything else, because of HIPAA and the privacy rules, is kind of off. You feel like it's off limits. You go out in the hallways and you see other people and you think, I wonder if there's somebody else that's got the shared experience, but you're afraid to ask because of the HIPAA gauntlet that you feel has come down. And then just, you know, any kind of creature comforts and everything, you know, when you're in the hospital and trying to coordinate all that, you know, a lot of those things become really important, but sometimes the logistics is very difficult. So, you know, lots of impediments, especially, I mean, she was in the hospital for 7 months. And so that was a long time to be kind of figuring out how to do daily things with that.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned the isolation piece about that. So what did you think relationally was something, if you looked back on, you would have hoped for or wanted or wished that maybe relationally you and like your husband, you could have maybe connected more?
Well, we did try, you know, I mean, she would have visitors periodically. And so during that time, we wanted to give her the space to be able to visit with her friends. And so that would usually be the time where we would take a moment and, you know, go to dinner or whatever, and just spend a few moments talking and decompressing a little bit. But again, it was, like I say, it was either one or the other of us was always in the room with her, aside from when she had visitors or whatever. Okay. And so, you know, just trying to carve out those small pieces of time, I think, was important for us. Not perfect, but it definitely helped.
Yeah. How was the communication? Does anybody have any ideas about like communication? Because I'm thinking about like the whole connection piece, right? And so like communicating with your partner or communicating with your other family members, like in a way that's not so patient focused.
I mean, I think aside from the patient focus, then it moves to the finances and the basic needs. I mean, that's what we see on a daily basis. And so it's like, do we have groceries? Who's picking up who from school? And it really, I mean, when you're looking at like hierarchy of needs, you can't even get to relationship because you're just down at like food and water, and really trying to make sure that those things are taken care of. And so it's kind of hard to jump the tier up there, to that relationship until we make sure that the families have those basic needs. And so that's just something that we focus on here.
Makes sense a lot. Okay. Do you have any ideas along that could help, like maybe with that whole, the hierarchy needs piece?
I mean, I just think talking with the families about what do you need, opening that conversation, you know, and the last one, it's a vulnerable place to be, to ask for help. But if we really want to support the families, just saying, you know, on the most basic level, what can we do for you right now? And like Abby said, it's just some of those creature comforts, like, you know, what can we bring you? What can we have delivered? You know, and making some of those things happen.
So I'm hearing you're saying that if there's a way to take care of, lighten the load somewhat, right? Lighten the load, then families, parents would actually at least be able to breathe enough to like enjoy maybe a dinner, not maybe like completely, but like at least try and connect in some way.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
I heard another layer in there, and maybe it's just the pattern recognition with the earlier discussion we had around stigma and mental illness, but it seems like there's this opportunity when the person comes to, the family comes to get treatment, to set expectations. Like, you know, there are going to be a lot of things that these logistics that you just got to take care of, and the basics, and those are going to fill your brain up, because there are lots of them, and they aren't going to be simple like they used to be. And then there'll be these other things about optimizing your care, and then below that is like your relationships. You got to take care of yourself, and all these other things that, you know, I don't even know what they are because I haven't lived through it. But just to set expectations that these things are here. Don't let it surprise you. We're gonna at least set your expectations. Maybe it's about setting expectations.
Yes.
And saying, schedule time, do this, and then you could figure out like, what do we put in place to make sure that you have 5 restaurants that you know you can go to that don't have a waiting line, or, you know, like,
right.
But just the idea that these things are there. Get ready.
Mm-hmm. Right. You know,
Don't be surprised.
Yes, we talked in the earlier session about people's stories, right? And having the relatability of like, so maybe having families actually speak about, or couples speak about this piece of it. Because yeah, right. You only know if you know. And so if you aren't prepared and aren't having the expectations, that would be, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Anybody else have anything? I know, I guess in the other one, they had talked about the piece of like communicating and like being in touch with your family. And so they had talked about, and I was even thinking about like the hierarchy needs piece of like a journal or like a notebook that was going back and forth between parents, family, to have like little thoughts or something. I don't know. That was one idea that they were kind of looking at. So I wanted to just get y'all's ideas on like, how can we help families connect? Because as humans, right, we need that connection. And I'm imagining that it would be so much even a higher need. I know you're talking about the basics, but like, how can we get them to connect and feel really like they're still a family or still a couple?
I'll share my personal experience.
Okay.
So my daughter was diagnosed in 2006 with DIPG, which is pretty much 100% fatal. So, and I was a single parent at the time with 2 children. So I had to manage, you know, I've got one child that needs my 100% attention, and I've got to be with her at the doctor. And then I've got my son who still needs to kind of go on with his life and school and everything. So my parents really stepped in and kind of provided him that stability where he could stay. We're in Kansas, and it's 3 hours to the children's hospital. So there's no, staying home and going to the doctor's visit or going in for radiation and being home that same day. We had to pretty much relocate for 6 weeks for radiation. And then we actually went to Houston later on for treatment, and we lived at a Ronald McDonald House there. So, so I really had to balance, in one aspect, I really had to balance with my children and still being able to be a parent to my son and be there for my daughter as well. So it was really a challenge. And I think actually being a single parent in some ways made it a little bit easier because I didn't have to manage that other relationship with a spouse. I didn't, the decisions became my decisions instead of, having to agree with someone else. So in some aspects, I think some people are, felt bad for me for being, being a single parent. It did financially have a bigger impact because I was a sole provider. And so without community fundraisers, I would never have survived those 11 months. So it was definitely a challenge. And I mean, we tried as good as we could. My son did suffer, the effects of going through that. He was 9 years old when his sister passed. And so there was, to this day, he's 22 now, still having to seek therapy for things that, it's just a traumatic thing to go through. And so, he went from having a sibling he was close to being an only child. And so it's a lot to try to balance those things. And yeah, you're not even really thinking about, you start thinking about the basics and just surviving day to day. And one of the things I thought might be helpful, like there was no real emotional or psychological support for the parents at the hospital. There's so much focus on the child. Like, they come in and sit down with you. This was towards the end and want you to sign a DNR for your child. And that is a huge thing on someone's shoulders. And there's no follow-up or no kind of, there's no lead up to that, like to prepare you for that. And to just kind of leave that on you. And then it's like, now you're left to deal with that kind of, how do I deal with this? I'm not ready, to go through this. And we had a horrible experience with hospice. I think in most cases, hospice kind of can step in and be that emotional support for families. But our experience with hospice, being in a small town, they just never dealt with children. And so I was turned off from the very start with my relationship with them, which was unfortunate because that might have been able to provide some of that emotional support through that treatment. But there's just, the children's hospitals just don't have those resources, I don't think, to help the parents getting through that as well, because your emotional health is so important when you're going through that with your child. So
yes, I think that's a really great point about the emotional piece, and that how can we provide more resources for the families. And I'm thinking about like your son, and thinking about like he's also having his own pain and grief, but he's also watching his mom, right? And going through all of that. And so like, I'm sure there was lots of unanswered questions and just not really knowing how to like, you guys to come towards each other, right? Because it's at that time. Yeah. Anybody we talked about that in the earlier session, it was about stigma of mental health. And we were talking about how there has to be more accessibility for the emotional support. Anybody got any ideas about that?
I think having the conversation too, just that transparency and conversation of this, these are some of the feelings, or, like Heidi said, just the acknowledgement of, this is what's happening. I know I went through the sibling side on the opposite side. My sister was in the hospital for 6 months after she was born. And I my parents sent me away to live with somebody else because she was in the NICU and they didn't think that she was going to survive. So, you know, I mean, and then that's something, I mean, I'm almost 40 and it's something that I still talk about, and, you know, and it impacted our family relationship. And she was at Texas Children's, but there was no acknowledgement of this is how it's impacting your whole family and siblings. And so I just think, again, just the awareness and the acknowledgement that we're bringing to it. I know it's not necessarily a solution, but it's just a step in the right direction to provide those resources.
So my sister was also diagnosed with cancer when I was a child. And I think acknowledging is super important, and also the recognition that everybody, even though it's impacting the entire family, is experiencing it differently. So like those impacts are different on the sibling versus the child who is living with cancer versus, you know, other family members or the parents. And so just recognizing that what you're seeing and experiencing might not be the same perspective that, or like what the other people involved are seeing and experiencing. And I think also explaining what's going on, especially for siblings, can be really helpful. I was really lucky in that there were hospital staff members willing to like sit down and tell me what was going on, because it makes a sibling at least feel more involved. So
good point. So like maybe you know, a small kind of group or class, or like an orientation, something more family centered around definitely siblings, I think would be a great avenue for them, because you're right, you don't know unless you know. And so like being able to have a place to process and understand, and going back to what David was saying, the expectations of the stay. I've heard a lot about relocation, which that's big, right? If you're having to not be in your home. So what do you guys think about that piece of, someone said the comforts, right? The creature comforts. Anything else that you guys can think about as far as the relocation piece as well? Yes.
I guess from our experience, and we actually ended up having to move back to San Diego because of this, but because my daughter was a young adult, she was kind of in the middle of those offered services. So there's services that are offered for families up to the child being 18. And then if you're in the adult hospital, you know, there's other services, but we were kind of in this no man's land where we had to relocate to one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. And the cheapest hotel room is $400 a night. And we were up there for 3 months. Those are out-of-pocket expenses that we had to experience. And it was the same with any of the other services, the counseling, all of that stuff. None of that was available to us, which is, again, one of the, you know, AYA challenges that I think people are looking at and trying to overcome. But that was really a struggle for us. But it was important for us to be up there where her friends were so that they could visit. And that sort of thing. So we recognized that it was just something that we made the choice to do. But ultimately, she decided that she saw that expenses were getting high, and I think it stressed her out. And we ultimately moved down to San Diego for her to finish treatment. But the other thing, kind of going back to the sibling aspect, so my son was in college, and I'd already moved away from home when my daughter was diagnosed. And I did sit down with him and have that conversation, because I had an older brother when I was growing up. I'm from a big family, and basically both of my parents focused 100% on that child that had colon cancer. And I was raised for about 6 months by my older siblings, right? And so, and I know there was bitterness about that, I think. And so for me to sit down, I knew it was important to sit down with him and have the conversation that our focus is on our daughter right now, but I don't want you to feel like you are forgotten. And so, you know, we need to stay open and communicate. And if there's things you need, I want you to know right now that you should feel comfortable coming to us about that. and that it's not, you know, a slight to you or any of that. Just to make sure that he knew and heard it out loud that this was something that was happening, but that I didn't want him to feel forgotten in the process, because I know that does happen quite often. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's a struggle. So feeling like the door was open to talk about it. And I think
Okay.
the counseling services might have been good. You know, that family conference you talked about, I think here's what's ahead, having us all in the room, and periodically down the road as we experience new and different things would probably just have been, you know, a nice neutral venue to sort of talk through some of that.
Right. You mentioned his needs. And so I'm like thinking, you know, what do you guys think about the needs of the family members for the piece of the emotional support? I mean, obviously a place to talk, right? Counseling would help, but what other needs can you guys come up with for like families, couples going through this?
I think
Just
COVID,
like,
Sorry.
go ahead.
no, it's all right, Abby. I just think COVID's put us in such a technology space, that teletherapy. I know there's a lot with HIPAA and understanding how all of that is going to play out. But I just think that that could be a great solution, because the parents can then, if one parent's in the hospital room and the other parent's at home with the siblings, they can both log on and be with the therapist, or counselor, but not in the same place. So I'm hoping that we can see maybe COVID has jump-started some of those conversations. And I know it's not happening at our hospitals as much as we need it to, just locally. And so that's something that we're very interested in kind of helping get going.
I like that idea as far as like connecting, because like siblings, teens, young adults, I'm finding through COVID are doing much better through teletherapy. They're actually more comfortable in their own environment versus, you know, going to the hospital and having a big family consultation. So I agree with you. I think that that would really open up the lines of communication, the expectations. That would be really cool to figure out some way of making sure that it sounds like to me, a lot of you guys are talking a lot about the family-centered piece of it and really bringing in the family. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Abby. You had something.
I have half a thought. And it's around routine. And a lot of us, you know, you always hear about people whose lives radically change when they retire, you know, or if a spouse dies, obviously that's a big deal. But even just retiring, you think everything's going to get better now, but you lose your routine. And I think routines, rituals, rhythms, those get all blown apart when something like this happens. Everything gets mobilized. It's an emergency. The house burns down, you move somewhere. Someone gets cancer, you move somewhere. Even people get tired of vacations because their routine, they look back to their routine. So I think that there's something about routines that have been missing, and perhaps something about building new routines or trying to put a proxy in for the old routines. You don't sit down and have dinner, even if nobody talks right at dinner. You don't do it every day because we're all separate. So perhaps there's some, like, routines is some route for solutions. I don't know.
No, I love that.
You
use the word ritual. And so in my marriage and family therapy practice, I work a lot with families and couples on creating a ritual. Let's create a ritual, because a ritual actually brings you connection. So it could be as small as, you know, you send a joke of the day, or you, you know, at 3:33 every day, you say hi, or, you know, it's a way that you do a handshake or whatever. But exactly, like if we could figure out a way that these families could figure out like a ritual of like kind of mashed into that routine. What do you guys think about that? Like the ritual piece of feeling connected.
I would definitely agree. I think the challenge is making sure that people starting that whole cancer journey understand the importance of that, because I think sometimes it becomes something in retrospect you're like, I really should have done that, or I really should have been doing that throughout it, and you don't realize the importance of it. So I think one of the things is making sure that families and, you know, newly diagnosed people are aware of the importance of that, and just kind of emphasizing, hey, you know, these are some of the things you should be, you know, doing, even though they might not realize how important it is right then. So, and maybe it's almost in a sense forcing them to kind of do, like, without, you know, forcing someone, but making it so that they just automatically, like, if it's an automatic thing that you just, you should do this when you're first diagnosed or when you first start treatment, you know, I don't know.
Guidelines, right? Like giving them guidelines and then walking them through the process. Accountability, kind of like accountability partner in that.
Yeah, I think the other thing it offers is giving, you know, when everything else around you is not normal and chaotic, having those rituals. It's like when we used to have pizza and movie night with the kids at home, right? It was something they looked forward to every Friday night because it was something that was fun for all of us to do together. So what you had to do is kind of re-identify what are those things that you can do that even if you're feeling sick or it's been a rough week or a rough day, we've still got that thing to look forward to, but not so much that it feels like, oh gosh, we got to, you know, it's Friday, it's pizza movie night. Well, now what are we going to do? You know, it has to be something that everybody looks forward to and brings joy and a sense of, you know, moving away from just always focusing on the reality of the cancer and what's going on. I think that's really helpful.
So I just had an idea pop in my head, and maybe what it is even, you know, from an outside perspective, from an organization, maybe they're sending a special text message to these families on an, like, as a ritual. And so that kind of starts that ritual like process, but maybe it comes from the outside. And so then it kind of helps them create that. And so it kind of gives them that uplifting, you know, maybe it's just, you know, words of encouragement, you know, but it's becomes a ritual where they're looking forward to reading that quote of the day or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. There's no bad ideas. I would love to hear everything. And that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the hard things is a lot of people, they get to a point when, because they're outside the bubble, you're inside the bubble, right? And the people outside the bubble are like, oh, I don't know when to call. I don't know when to, you know, I don't want to bother them, which I totally get, because when I'm outside the bubble, I kind of feel the same way. And so if you have that ritual, what it does is it takes the stress out of, oh, I don't know if I should talk to them or not. And even if it's like a calendar reminder or something like that, you know, hey, check in with so-and-so today. It's a, you know, it's a little, it's a helpful reminder. It allows you to do it whether there's a crisis or not, because a lot of times you'll hear from everybody when medical things are not going well. But then when everything's kind of steady state and you're just waiting until the next round of chemo or whatever, you hear from nobody. And so to have more of a consistency across the other people within the community that are providing support, I think it would feel less like an island that you're on and more like just a place you're at for a short period of time, or, you know, in and out, whatever.
You mentioned calendar. I'm kind of thinking in my head and like then going on with your like idea about like a text or something, like actually having like something that's kind of like reminder, like a booklet or calendar or something that like has ideas, but that doesn't have like, you know, or the quotes and everything, but that doesn't cost, they don't have to go out and find it, right? Like it's something that's there to support them and then give them examples or general ideas to do. What kind of rituals do you think that could be done that wouldn't be so much work for the families? Because I love the pizza movie night. I love it. But like, you know, like that might be too big. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like what other ideas could we come up with?
I feel like it could be something even as simple as like taking the dog for a quick walk, or like, you know, all being on Zoom at the same time, or like watching a TV show together or something like that.
Yeah, or having dinner or lunch, having a meal.
Okay. Yeah.
I think meals are really important.
Meals are okay.
Yeah, I mean, when you're living in the hospital all the time, food becomes a luxury. And if you're at the mercy of whatever the hospital has to offer, the luxury is not so, it's like a 1-star experience. So you really want to be able to have opportunities, and whether it's somebody signs up to deliver the meal to the hospital. 5 years ago, we didn't really have that luxury with the hospitals we were at. It was more go out and get it yourself. But now that they have all these food delivery services, that's certainly something that it's one less stressor, because nobody's happy when they're hungry, right? So it brings joy back into the room, and it's again sitting around the dining room table or around the hospital bed or wherever you end up eating. I mean, it's a way to have conversation and not have to worry about how the food gets there.
This is Livestrong HQ. I go back to thinking about, I know when families are in the NICU here, they're awarded charms for certain thresholds that they reach with their child, and they collect each of the charms for those milestones or little steps that they're taking. And I know how important those are to the parents, and they really get connected to that and celebrate those milestones. Or also, like when someone's expecting, they get that app that tells them, okay, this week, this is what your baby's doing, or this is what you should be experiencing. So something along the lines, like going back to communicating expectations and rituals, like if there was something that they kind of got a reminder or got pinged where, whether it's support, like you may be, if you're so many weeks into this, you may be feeling X, Y, Z, or this is normal, or this is ahead, just kind of, what are those little markers that could be offered in the pediatric cancer space that we've seen in other industries and medical related experiences?
Like it. Very cool.
Something we've been doing is holiday boxes and trying to deliver holiday boxes into the inpatient rooms. And so since we cannot be in the playrooms or be on the hallways, and so they have like decorations in it and little toys and activity pages. And then because of my sibling experience, I said, hey, can we get these delivered to the siblings at home? And they can have a similar experience of opening the boxes or having their room decorated. Because I think something you forget from a sibling point, especially the younger siblings, is they don't see the cancer. They just see the attention that's being given. And I think that's okay for us, and we need to recognize that because they don't understand the gravity of the situation. And so just that we're trying to mirror this experience of, hey, we're celebrating, you too, and you can decorate your room and have these activities is maybe a little bit of a bridging the gap there.
Great. What do you guys think about like the couple piece? Any ideas? Like, I mean, going with the whole ritual piece and the routine, but I want to also like identify the struggles that most of the parents that I know that have gone through pediatric cancer have separated. And of course, it's a very, very difficult thing to navigate.
I know right now, like just with what I hear from families that are going through it currently with all the COVID restrictions, there's only one parent that's able to be with the child now. And so they're really just kind of switching off. And so I think, that whole having a journal or having something that they can kind of pass between one another, even though they're going to have those phone calls and stuff like that, but maybe something more concrete that can then be something they can in the future reflect back on, because who doesn't wish they had written a journal, like going through that, you always look back and you're like, gosh, I wish I would have written down my experiences. Like for us, we kept journals on Caring Bridge. So, you go back and reflect on that. But especially now with the separation of the families and, they're not having that time together, Or like one thing that I've heard from a family recently that's been tough is, you know, the doctor comes in the room and there's only the one parent is there. Well, that parent might not ask the same questions that the other parent would have asked. And so there's that lack of communication, even with the staff and hospital, the doctors and the social workers. They're not getting those same questions because they're not both there, you know. And so the parent that's not there says, well, didn't you ask about this? Well, no, I didn't think about that, you know. So I think even thinking about that aspect too is really a struggle for some of these families, I know. But having a journal or something encouraging, you know, them to kind of start something like that, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I do too. Like even just saying like, I'm feeling annoyed today, or I'm feeling like frustrated, and thank you for being able to talk to the doctor today. Here's 2 questions that I have, or whatever, just ways that you can like actually connect with your partner so they know how you're feeling too. And then you could do the like hierarchy of needs piece, like don't forget to buy dog food when you get home, right? Or whatever. Yeah.
One thing that just popped in my head is maybe even giving parents a, you know, a stack of cards, you know, and one might just be, you know, hi, and, you know, and so it kind of gives them that start, like, hey, write a note to your partner.
Yeah.
And it's already, they don't have to go to the store and find a card, you know, and it can just be a variety of different cards. They just have those in stock, you know, there, so that when something comes to them or they just need to express some feelings, and those little cards might end up being something they cherish in the future too. I don't know. I mean, an easy, simple way to kind of, you know, because who doesn't like getting a nice note, you know, every now and then.
And it can maybe evolve into that ritual piece, right? Like maybe, you know, they start it and then like they're sending one a week or something to each other.
I think there might also be some room for prompts that come from, you know, the healthcare team.
Okay.
That recognize that a lot of things are not going to, you don't want to talk about, and I don't know what all those things are, but it's healthy to talk about them, to make yourself talk about them, and somehow to have a discussion, sort of a discussion guide for maybe all the different dyads or the families or whatever. Maybe you and some caregiver that might come into your home, so that you've talked about things that are important. So providing discussion guides for the parents to talk about. And, you know, the person is free to not ask that question, but to, sometimes when you have it in front of you, you can say, oh, hey, it says here we should talk about our will. I don't want to do like, and then you start talking about your will, whether or not you do it. But it primes the pump, and it's not my idea or her idea. It's, they say we should do this. It sort of comes out a little bit more neutral.
Right. Ooh, I like that. I like the neutral piece of that, right? When you think about couples, they don't need any more stress of like, that's all his idea or that's all her idea.
Right, because let's remember, this, you know, their kid has cancer, but this couple brings all the dynamics and stress that were there building for years before they even had kids. So like, and that's unique to every couple. They bring the standard stress in addition to this emergency stress.
Like it.
I think it is important, though, you mentioned divorce rates with people that have gone through that. I think it's a huge thing, especially like I'm connected with a lot of families that have lost a child, and I think the divorce rate is very high because like you don't necessarily, you're not going to grieve in the same way. And so it's a major issue, I think, that is kind of overlooked. Like once you go through it and you lose that child, there's so much attention and everything immediately. And just like with the death of anyone, like that goes away so quickly. All that support and all that outreach, it just kind of dissipates so quickly. And then you're left with still dealing with that grief. And it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other interesting part of that, because we lost our daughter after the 7 months, and it's exactly right. You know, you were focused completely on that person, and your whole life basically revolves around doing things for that person, and you lose connection with everything else that was part of your previous normal. But the other hard thing that we discovered was that, you know, especially when you're in the hospital pretty much full time, is that the medical staff becomes your family, because you're now on that island together, right? They're the only ones you see, and you really develop a bond. They're the ones you're able to talk to and kind of air out, you know, different things that you're working through in your own mind. And the interesting thing about when a child passes away or anybody passes away, the door, you can hear it slamming behind you as far as any connection with anybody that you have just made, you know, or felt like it's more of your family than your family for the last X number of months. And I don't know if there's anything you can do to change that, but I think for me, I felt like I lost more than my daughter the day that she passed away. And that is something that's really hard to cope with too. It took us months to kind of work through that. And of course, I've been able to reconnect through our nonprofit, you know, some of the hospital staff again, but that was just a really difficult, because we really connected very strongly. You can't help but have that happen. And so that, you know, is another thing where I have heard that, like, sometimes like the social workers will follow up, and I know actually they did for us, you know, on the first anniversary of your child's passing, you know, they'll send a note and just let you know that they're, you know, they're thinking of that person and haven't forgotten. And I will tell you, for us, that meant a lot to hear from some of the medical staff that you know, she wasn't just another number, that she was important and they were thinking of her on that day. So, you know, little things like that really go a long way too.
What was y'all's experience, or did any of you have experiences with like other families or other parents going through this? And like, I'm trying to think about, would that be, because there's a lot about universality, right? Of like connecting with other people that are going through it. And so I don't know, I didn't know what your experience was of that. Is there any way to like do like support groups while you're going through it? I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know.
Well, in our case, they did offer, I think the one of the social workers did offer like I think it was an annual thing where you could get together, but of course that's one day. And if you're not in town or whatever, it doesn't necessarily work out. I think everybody kind of processes things in a different way. And so sometimes those really big group settings with all the families, it can be, you know, it has its pluses and minuses. Yeah, and I think for us, you know, we both kind of process things differently too, just as, you know, husband and wife. And so, you know, we kind of worked through it, I guess, but it was a long process.
Mm-hmm. Would you have known like what, like, because we talked earlier in the other session about accessibility, would you have known who to contact and everything if you guys had decided as a couple that you wanted like more individual counseling or more support emotionally?
I feel like, you know, what we would have done is just call the hospital and say, hey, you know, we're having these issues. But again, because we were in that, you know, valley of no services, we didn't even feel like we had the right to ask that question, because we probably knew the answer and it was going to cost money. So yeah, we ended up not going that route.
Right. So I mean, obviously money is always a barrier, but it's sounding like that you're patient-centered, and then afterwards it's like money and finances. And so like the last thing on your mind is to go and find something for each other, for the couple or for the siblings, to kind of get back to normal as much as possible through processing all of the emotions.
We all just basically went back to work. I mean, that was our way to move forward. But I think the other thing that's kind of an interesting byproduct of us actually starting the nonprofit that we did, that was in memory of my daughter, and it's focused on helping young adult supporters have kind of the tools and information to be able to support their friends, because often they disappear because they don't have that tool set yet, that life experience. But what was interesting about starting the nonprofit is it allowed us to have the conversation about our daughter without feeling like we were throwing the wet blanket on the party every time, right? Because we still want to talk about that person. You still want to remember them. You still want their name to come up in positive ways. And yet people don't want to bring it up because I don't know if it's going to upset you, or they don't want to bring it up because it's depressing or whatever it might be. So really it was kind of interesting. An unexpected consequence of starting a nonprofit was it allowed us to process the loss of our daughter by being able to talk about her and about the situation with others.
Okay. Yeah. So that's awesome. Yeah, the brain definitely processes through getting it out, right? The more that you're able to like tell that story. So what do you guys think as far as like, we've got like a little bit longer as far as relational needs with a pediatric cancer patient for families and couples? So like if you think about the relational need of connection, right? We've identified that. The expectations. Are there any other needs that we're like, that y'all could think of that we need to address? Find something a solution focused about?
I think give them reasons to laugh. I mean, we forget how to laugh and how important it is to laugh when we're sitting in the room. My daughter usually would break the silence with some joke that she would tell. That was her coping mechanism. But I feel like laughing really has a healing power that we underestimate.
Okay.
I think the laughing part of it, when you go through the loss of your child, you feel guilty if you laugh after going through that loss, because you're like, wait a minute, because you find yourself, it's definitely not, right after that loss, but there becomes a time where you start to kind of feel different emotions instead of just sadness, and you start feeling really guilty that you do have something to smile about, but it's a gradual thing, but it's something you don't really think about until you go through it.
I'm wondering if the idea of continuity can be inspiring or guiding. We talked about routines, right? There's some continuity from before or within, like we had this routine before and now we want to keep doing it, some proxy for it. Or you might create a routine during this weird relocation, like we're going to do this now to stay in touch. And it's interesting, Abby mentioned you spend all this time relocated, treating, working with these brand new people. They become your family. Like, so you've created a new routine and continuity, and then that ends. And so there's this whole idea that continuity, like we like continuity. We like the feeling of familiar. And all these disruptions happen. And no one wants to lose a child. That's a big disruption. No one wants to get divorced. That's a disruption. No one wants to be cut off from their friends. And I wonder, you can't stay connected to all of your friends when you're going through this. It seems like there's probably some sweet spot. Like, how do I stay connected to enough of them that I'm still connected to my friends? And how do I stay connected enough to my coworkers, even if maybe I'm not working anymore? So I'm still connected with them because I can't be connected to all of them. How do I stay connected to enough of the hospital staff? Because they'd go crazy if they stayed connected all the time with all the people that, like, that's not scalable, right? They're going to have a 30-year career. But some mechanism in this nice one-year thing is, I think, a way. So this idea of continuity, you really want to stay connected to your previous life so that when you get through this thing, whatever shape it takes, and whoever you lose, you still have some connection to that on the other end. So you don't have to start from scratch. Imagine losing your child, getting divorced, finding that you're in a new place, and maybe you stay there, like starting from scratch. Like that's got to be the most extreme loss of continuity. Question is, like, how would you, or some of our speakers were to say, well, what a great, like, maybe that's an opportunity, and that could be for some people, but how do we create continuity that they can come back to?
David, I'm thinking, like, what about a time capsule or something that you start at the beginning of the process and people contribute to it, and then there's these milestones in which you open up different elements of the time capsule, and maybe there's messages from different people, or maybe, you know, something that you kind of put in place to have those things to connect with along the way, and even post.
It's a plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I also think about call trees, but in like text format. Is there a way for people to volunteer to take, you know, even if it's anonymous, or to send a joke of the day, or it's my turn, instead of bringing a casserole, that's what it used to be, right? Like you'd bring the meal for the day. Like, what if it's to send the text, some sort of community of people volunteering to do that. If you could sign up, you could elect to be a part of, I want people to text me or something, and then you could share that with your family members. Oh, what message did we get today, or what quote did we get today, or you know, something that they could look forward to and share amongst themselves, but they don't have to be responsible for or initiate in any way or remember to do.
That's interesting. There are a whole bunch of interesting ideas in there. This whole funnel, this like funnel of my friends, you know, like 2 friends are responsible for gathering from all of them something interesting that happened in the network, or, you know, from my work. And then this idea of a time capsule, and then planning, like envisioning what life is going to be like when we're done here. Because if you forget what that could be like, then it's so easy to veer off.
Yes, I love the theme about the continuity and the ritual piece of it, and somehow linking like an actual tangible, whether it's like a calendar or time capsule or these milestone charms or something to help these families be guided to feeling connected to something.
And what I hear is like keeping it small and keeping it personable, you know, just a text or the greet, you know, the card exchange or whatever. And I think that's what I hear from overwhelming, like, I mean, I would say almost 100% of the families is they don't want to go to a big support group. They don't want to hear about everybody else's journey. They're still trying to hold on to hope and, you know, a little bit different thing in the support group. Usually they walk away with a loss of hope, is just from what I've heard. And so I think this is maybe a very different way of thinking, because when I ask my social workers and people that are involved in resources, it's go to this support group. And so I think the smaller scale and just all these ideas here are something very different that is encouraging.
Very encouraging. Yes. All right, great. So we're gonna, we got a couple more minutes. So I want to like sum it up. What I'm basically hearing is what y'all are saying is simple for the family, more helping the family to become more family centered, right? And having that continuity through some kind of routine, ritual. And I honestly think it might need to be something like tangible. That would be great, or through text or some kind of guide where they don't have the cards. Idea was great. Like they don't have to think about it, but it's some way that they can actually reach out and connect with either their other family members or their other kiddos, or their partner. I think that would be really, really great. The journal book was kind of similar ideas like the card. So yeah, just trying to find something that's really tangible, I think, like that they can actually like focus on and, you know, reflect on. I know a lot of times you might want to do the card, or you might want to write something, but you aren't doing it right then and there. You need time to reflect. So yeah, maybe having something where it's always there for them that they can go to when they want to. The communication piece was huge. I think that's really important. Y'all brought that up as far as how can y'all communicate the needs and the things that are going on, the hierarchy piece of it. So yeah, anybody want to give any last minute thoughts? I think this was really great. Thank y'all all for y'all's input. Appreciate it. Any last thoughts?
This is kind of random and might be like way off base in terms of coming up with like a discussion guide or whatever. But a little while ago, I had bought my boyfriend a book that's called like The Story of Us. And it has like all these pages that have discussion prompts, and like some of them aren't just to write, like you can also draw, and like they get you talking together. And obviously it wouldn't be the same types of prompts, but like a book that you don't even have to go in a certain order. Like you can just open to a random page and chat about it and have a record of what happened.
Then they could, their partner or their family member could look at it and just feeling that connection through those words and that reflection, I think it's really, would be really big.
Yep, those are really interesting. That's
yeah, I
a
think
great
the
idea.
other thing is having like just activity. Sometimes the best conversations come up while you're playing a game together, the most laughter. And so, you know, what are those activities that actually could be done as a family where you're all just kind of forgetting for a moment what, you know, what the circumstances are for the room you're in, but you're still being able to connect and enjoy and smile and
Right.
have
You know, the jars, you know how like you write on the popsicle sticks, like ideas for your family, and then you pull it out. Like, yeah, I think something like that, like the activities with the book and just the prompts and just, yeah. We could even,
That's brilliant, like an activity book, that,
like you could
like
even
a coloring book, and
with the cards in it, right? Little greeting cards in it too. So like some, just kind of like, yeah, that story, that narrative piece for them to connect. Cool. Awesome, you guys. Really appreciate it. Great ideas. All right. Well, I think we did a great job, and I really appreciate all of y'all's input.
thanks.
Yes,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye-bye.